Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm going to walk you through the context of this case. And to do this, I'm going to draw directly from a dismissal demand letter that was issued on May 20th of this year to interim county attorney Rachel Mitchell, sent by defense counsel. On June 25th, 2020, exactly 1 month after a historic uprising erupted across Arizona, through the rest of the country and throughout the entire world in protest of police murders of 2 Black men, George Floyd in Minneapolis and Dion Johnson here in Phoenix. Another Black man in Phoenix was also assaulted and falsely arrested after being racially profiled in an alleged hit and run accident, an accident that he was not responsible for and MCAO didn't ever charge. But had they charged him, it would have only ever been a misdemeanor. That night, Phoenix Police Department's investigation began with a 911 call from a person who couldn't actually tell whether the drivers of the vehicle she believed had struck her car were Hispanic or Black. At the scene, officers disregarded the person's statements to 911 about how the color of the vehicle and what model of the vehicle was. Also, they disregarded her inability to identify the driver or the passenger, and they also disregarded her statements about the vehicle's stopping point. They said that it stopped at a drive-through liquor store, and that's important. Let's hold on to that fact because it becomes relevant a bit later. Instead, officers swiftly locked on to a shirtless Black man, Justin Proctor, a relative of Glen Robertson, who was standing next to a vehicle that was completely different color from the one that had been reported. The vehicle was parked at a pizza restaurant, 2 buildings away from the Cork and Bottle drive-through where the witnesses had said that the driver of the hit and run ended up. Within moments, Phoenix police officers would go hands-on with Proctor, violently assaulting and arresting him. Moments later, Glen Robertson exited the pizza restaurant, not the liquor store, headed eastbound on foot, at which point Phoenix Police Department was violently arresting his relative, and he noticed. In that intense moment, Glen Robertson would invoke the words millions of people across the world were shouting in protest to police violence and in memory of George Floyd that summer. He would exercise his First Amendment rights by shouting Black Lives Matter over and over, attempting to call public attention to the assault of a Black man by police that was playing out right before his eyes. And it's no surprise that Phoenix police then turned their attention onto the Black man expressing his political values. And now those political values were linked and are synonymous, right, with criticism of law enforcement. Remember that there were protests happening just blocks away from where this arrest was taking place. And the same police agency, Phoenix Police Department, miles away, were violently arresting hundreds of people for the exact same reason: their protest of police violence and their chants that Black Lives Matter. At that point, Phoenix police demanded Glen get back. He complied. They demanded without cause that he get on the ground, but he wasn't given a chance to comply with that demand, and Phoenix PD immediately tackled him, injuring and handcuffing him. The Phoenix police officers repeatedly claimed that the hit and run allegation, in which Glen was ultimately never charged, was the reason they arrested him. But their obvious intention was to retaliate against him for expressing political views that challenged the state's authority while they were violently arresting another Black man, just as they were doing blocks away to hundreds of protesters that very same night. The Phoenix Police Department were well aware that they lacked probable cause and reasonable suspicion to stop Glen that night. But all they saw at that point was a Black man with a record. So they manufactured a chargeable offense like they always do, and Phoenix PD latched on to a statement that Glen understandably made in anger while handcuffed, seated, and surrounded by police. A statement that Officer Kelsey Belcher, the alleged victim in this case, even laughed at when she heard it. Phoenix PD claimed that Glen Robertson threatened and intimidated Belcher with that statement, and they claimed that he did so to promote a criminal street gang, the Crips. And this is where Maricopa County Attorney's Office comes in and does what they always do. They added criminal street gang charges to Glen's case. Maricopa County Attorney's Office's prosecutors, motivated by the same racial bias and purpose as PPD, refused to serve as objective ministers of justice like they claim to. And MCAO chose to support Phoenix PD's meritless claims and prosecuted Glen for multiple gang-related offenses. And then the ensuing 2 years of litigation, MCAO doubled down, charging Glen with a DUI in retaliation for his efforts to modify his release conditions. Now, after 2 years of being locked in a cage, Glen is finally getting his day in court. Today is the 4th day of his trial, and we are there to talk about everything that happened in the circus of that courtroom. There are people from our team who are still in that courtroom as court is about to adjourn. And we're here right now to talk to you about every single thing that we saw Deputy County Attorney James Bauman do. And we want to ensure that MCAO understands that the community is watching. They are doing this just to secure a conviction against Glen Robertson in a case that 3 judges have already publicly stated is a weak case. And those judges, one is a retired federal prosecutor, said so on the record. We know that they're fighting tooth and nail to lock away Glen for decades because County Attorney Rachel Mitchell wants to dodge accountability for another false MCAO gang charge right in the middle of an election that the public forced on this year's ballot. That's why Rachel Mitchell has allowed DCA James Bauman to employ every desperate tactic possible to impede Glen Robertson's defense, from filing motions to ban the community from attending the trial, from stating on the record that MCAO has been colluding with Maricopa County Attorney's Office has been colluding with Arizona Department of Juvenile Corrections to influence a defense witness, another Black man, by threatening his employment, and they won. They got that Black man fired. And the latter just happened yesterday at the trial. You'll be hearing from this expert who was punished for telling the truth that Glen Robertson is not a gang member. DCA James Bauman's misconduct resulted in DeMarcus Woods, a Black veteran from South Phoenix with over 27 years of law enforcement experience, being terminated from his job. And he found this out that he had been fired because DCA Bauman inappropriately announced it on the record during trial yesterday.
Thank you so much, Lola, for taking us through all of that context and what we just saw happen yesterday at the trial. I'm going to introduce Mr. DeMarcus Woods, who is the defense's expert, gang expert witness. Mr. DeMarcus Wood is part of D. Wood's consultants, and that's who he represented at the trial. And so Mr. Wood stepped out of court to make this conference literally like just minutes before, and he's going to speak about how this was absolutely a protest case and why it was important for him to take this case, even though his job was at stake. The floor is yours, Mr. Woods.
Hello, thanks a lot for having me. Again, my name is DeMarcus Woods. I'm here at the Central Courthouse. I was officially assigned as the expert for Glen Robertson in his case. In my analysis of his case, I know the trial is still going on. I determined that, obviously the Black Lives Matter protests and certain aspects of his speech were obviously announced on the day of the incident. I took the case personally, more so because of him being identified as a gang member and and the evidence, of my review not supporting that. As we go deeper into this and into this matter, I've noticed, obviously some behaviors, comments I've heard in the introduction as far as I'm supposedly fired. I haven't received notice of anything like that, but obviously it's been made public. And so I guess that's going to be a legal concern. I have a confidentiality agreement, so I'm not going to bridge that at this time. I will continue to perform my duties as a gang expert and continue to push this, use my knowledge and expertise to ensure that justice prevails and that the truth ultimately comes out, and that I'm confident that the jury, with the information presented, that the jury will see the truth of all the evidence that's been presented and they make a good decision. in the meantime, I guess we'll just, continue to, everybody does their role. And that's going to be, that's going to be about it that, as far as comments that I'm able to share at this time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Woods. So up next is Bruce Franks Jr., who was one of the protesters during the 2020 uprising, who faced fabricated charges and whose charges were ultimately dismissed. But of course, not before the community got involved, like we are right now with Glen Robertson's case. A huge movement happened. I'll pass it to you, Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you, Rhea. First off, the similarities I see with this case is that the community showed up. The community showed up for directly impacted people. Directly impacted orgs showed up for directly impacted people. We see once again the Maricopa County Attorney colluding with the Phoenix Police Department to bring gang charges, just like they did in 2020. We see the Phoenix Police Department lying on police reports, just like we saw in 2020. We see the Maricopa County Attorney that knows these things are going on and continues, to proceed with this case, and not just proceed with this case, but believe in their own lies. As Lola said before in the context, so many lies were pointed out. But as this case has went on, I know things that I've seen and that have been reported and have been communicated, is that the Phoenix Police Department and the Maricopa County Attorney is lying again. And they're doing exactly what they do. As Mass Liberation always says, the system isn't broken, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Being a person that was directly impacted by that office and the collusion with Maricopa County Attorney's Office, as well as the Phoenix Police Department, my heart is with Glen. My heart is with his family. My heart is with the community. My heart is with all of those directly impacted. Because had it not been for organizing, had it not been for this directly impacted org, I would be facing 40 plus years. 40 years for making my, yes, political prosecution. Glen expressed that Black Lives Matter. He expressed that Black Lives Matter because he saw and he knows what's happened to us, not just in 2020, not just in 2018, not just in 2014, but forever since we've been here. And so this is a political prosecution. This is much like what was happening with the protesters. And this is a protest case because Glen made his voice very loud and he made his voice heard. And now we are at this point. And Lola is absolutely right. Rachel Mitchell and the Maricopa County Attorney, they are doing this because it's an election. They are doubling down because it is an election, right? And we've seen these politicians do that. We've seen these folks who are elected to law enforcement positions do this day in and day out. And so without this organization, without organizations, without directly impacted organizing, coming together and saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to stand up. We're going to band together. We're going to come together as a family and show up and show out every time. Our voices don't get heard. Our stories don't get heard. Our charges don't get dropped. And the reason there is an attorney's race right now that Rachel Mitchell is involved in is because a directly impacted organization came to the forefront and said, no, we're going to get these charges dropped, and then we're going to get the current attorneys out, and then we're going to roll. And that's exactly what they've been doing. So thank you, Mass Liberation, for all of your work that you put in. Thank you to all the directly impacted people who continue to re-traumatize themselves by showing up, because we still got to show up, because we got to show up for Glen until he is free as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruce. I am gonna pass it over to Lola now to just talk about the actions that MassLib has done today, and what our demands are as this case continues to go forward.
Thank you. Yeah, so first and foremost, it's important to underscore again that this is absolutely a protest case. This case that Glen Robertson is being charged and accused for, the case against him, has been one that I think everyone has forgotten happened along the backdrop of the 2020 protests. It is not unlike it at all. I think it's super important that we recognize that Rachel Mitchell, the interim Maricopa County attorney, really tried to distance herself from the scandals and the well-known corruption of the previous administration. And yet it appears that her administration is operating in lockstep with the same policies, the same procedures, and the same racist politics that were in place prior to her appointment. And perhaps no step has been more obvious in her strategy to try to distance herself than when she fired April Sponsel for a pattern of excessive charging and failure to review evidence. That is a political stunt that I think that is super important that we underscore and talk about, because what we see here today is an example of how, even though the office is claiming that it wants to end those policies, it wants to end those harmful practices, is operating behind closed doors. There is nothing different about the way that Rachel Mitchell is running this office than the way her predecessor ran the office. And we know that because Rachel Mitchell was made aware by defense counsel of this case. She was made aware, she was told all of the gaps in the issues, all of the misconduct that DCA James Bauman has been committing throughout the entirety of the case. She responded to these emails and she said, please CC me, I am looking into this. And just like her predecessor, she claimed to have been investigating and meanwhile is pressing forward on these cases, just like criminal street gang charges that happened in 2020. And it is only because the community got involved. It is only because the media and journalists like the ones on this call got involved and are paying attention that those 39 serious felonies and over 42 municipal cases in 2020 were dropped. All false charges, all against protesters who were exercising their First Amendment rights to criticize the violence of police, which is not unlike what Glen Robertson was doing on the day of his arrest. So it is just very, very important that we recognize this. It's also important to note that Mass Liberation Arizona served upon Rachel Mitchell a letter this morning demanding that she immediately drop all charges against Glen Robertson with prejudice. We also asked that she dismiss any other charges, including the 2019 case for which Glen is litigating a new trial, and the 2021 case that MCAO filed in retaliation to justify these false gang charges. We also demanded that she disband the gang bureau, where April Sponsel got her start and where James Bauman is running amok and doing these harmful things. And that leads us to our final demand, where we have demanded that Rachel Mitchell fire Sponsel's colleague, DCA James Bauman, for his similar misconduct in this case. Remembering there was a former federal prosecutor who was a judge who said very clearly that this case, that the efforts of James Bauman was skating on thin ice, and said specifically about this case that this case is one of the weakest that has ever been seen in that judge's career. So it's super important that we recognize that this case was brought anyway against the legal advice of judges, against common sense, and to the outrage of the community. So we're here today to call attention to it and to make clear that unless the community bears witness to the harms of this office, they will continue. And we're demanding, like I said, the three things: that they dismiss all of the charges against Glen, especially the charge where it was filed in retaliation to justify these false street gang charges, to disband the gang bureau where all of these harms take place, and to fire April Sponsel's colleague, DCA James Bauman, for his misconduct in this case and perhaps other cases. And it's definitely clear that his caseload does need to be looked at, because he's operating with the same policies, procedures, and racism that April Sponsel did.
Thank you so much, Lola. So as we conclude with the virtual press conference, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the questions that folks asked in the chat to our speakers. And I'm going to direct this to Lola right now. Was it argued in court that this was in fact a protest case?
We attended court virtually. I did attend court virtually, and so I was able to see some of the attempts that the defense counsel made to underscore that this was a protest case. In each of those instances, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office objected, and it looks as though the judge agreed. I know that there were sidebar arguments, but we aren't privileged to those. It's super important to recognize, though, that the failure to understand that is part of a systemic problem, where it is very clear that the inherent racism that is taking place during police arrests, the backdrop, the social backdrop, the fact that again, there was a huge, the largest uprising of our lifetime, of my generation's lifetime, was taking place, and all of the white people, and they are all white people, who were presiding over this case, including counsel, defense counsel, and judges. No one seemed to understand that entire concept had been lost on them. So it's very unfortunate, but although defense had asserted this to make clear to the jury the overall context in which this case took place, it was denied them. The jury did not get to hear that this was a protest case. I also want to flag too, we ended up having to push this press conference because of another stunt that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office had pulled by offering a rebuttal witness and effectively attempting to disqualify DeMarcus Woods, who was the street gang expert called by the defense. I know that he came off, he was stepping away from court right now because court was adjourned, and I think he was trying to get out of the building, so I don't think he's going to make it back onto this call. But that was the reason that the closing arguments were further delayed. Court is going to be adjourned now until Monday, so this now drug on the entire process. The jury is going to have to come back on Monday to deliberate. Closing arguments are expected to take place on Monday. To be clear, we are going to make sure that the community is aware of what takes place in those closing arguments. Again, there's opportunities for people to join we have a bit.ly link that is on our social media that you can join and attend court yourself. You can join either virtually or in person. And if you go in person, we have some organizers there to help you understand the rules of court, so that we're in compliance there, and also so that it's not a super overwhelming experience. We have folks that are going in and out together. So yeah, that's going to prolonged the proceedings, and it's going to now bleed into next week. We're hoping for a verdict shortly. It's a very cut and clear, dry case of racial profiling. So we're expecting the jury not to deliberate for long and for the outcome to be good. And we're expecting it to happen early this coming week.